Hello, and welcome to the Toronto Comic Arts Festival 2021, and welcome to the LGBTQ plus micro macro perspectives programming presented by Seneca College. My name is Miles Baker, and I'm the Executive Director of the Toronto Comic Arts Festival, joining you today from Patron Panel, the TCAF shop. I'm very excited for today's programming and to hand it off to Cleo, but before I do, I'd like to acknowledge the original caretakers of the land that I am on, the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the Wendat peoples. My home and this shop are in territory that was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee, Mississaugas, the Anishinaabe, and other allied nations. This area is also covered under Treaty 13, the Mississaugas of the Credit. This acknowledgement is not the first that you've heard through TCAF programming, and it will not be the last. These statements are part of a long process in thinking through what it means to live and work in colonized lands. TCAF has committed to strengthening its relationship with Indigenous communities and increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming going forward. It is now my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Cleo Peterson, a face I have not seen in a very long time. In the before times, I was lucky enough to work with Cleo here at Patron Panel. But beyond that, Cleo is a comics creator, an illustrator, and publisher. They are the co-founder of Old Growth Press, and their newest work is called New Growth and is published by Really Easy Press. Cleo, it's over to you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm so excited to be doing this panel with my amazing guests. We have Sami Alwani, Levi, and Syan Rose. And I'm gonna throw it over to them in a second to introduce their books and the work that we'll be talking about on this panel. So the gist of this panel is that we're exploring how comics can evoke extremely personal desires and the collective desires of the community, specifically LGBTQ+, can be met through social activism and personal works. So I'm going to go in order from what I see on my screen. So Sami, if you could introduce yourself and your work, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, my name is Sami Alwani. Nice to meet you, everybody. This is my first panel. I'm very excited to be here. I'm a cartoonist and illustrator, and I'm based here in Toronto. And I have my book coming out. I brought it with me beside me. It's The Pleasure of the Text. I guess it's out now because we're pre-recording this. So yeah, very excited to be here. My work has a lot of gay stuff in it. So I thought this would be a great panel. Excited to be a part of it. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. Now over to Levi.
Hi, my name is Lee. I'm originally from Australia, but now I'm living in Tiohtià:ke, so called Montreal. By the time this panel is coming out, I think my book is coming out the next day. It's called Stone Fruit. I think I have a copy of it somewhere. Oh, here we go. This chunky guy. It's coming out with Fantagraphics. And yeah, I'm a big rumor and always have been, so happy to talk about the ways in that can live with social activism and comics.
Thank you. And over to Syan, whose book I believe is already out, so we don't have to worry about it not being ready for pre-recording or not.
Hi, I'm Syan Rose, and this is my book right here. It's kind of giant. It's called Our Work is Everywhere, an illustrated oral history of queer and trans resistance. And it is an illustrated interview project with 22, I guess I'm 23 queer and trans contributors. And it's out now and has been for a bit. And it was published by Arsenal Pulp.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everybody. So I have individual questions for everybody because I want to kind of get into the gist of everyone's books. I'm going to start with Syan because I feel like Our Work is Everywhere gives us a good groundwork of being like, this is queer and trans existence. This is like, these are real people. And then I'll probably go to The Pleasure of the Text with Sami, and then we'll finish with Levi, and then I have questions for everybody. But if you have questions for each other, or if you ever want to jump in, just let me know and we can just vibe. So I'll start with Syan. Loved your book, by the way. Even before I was going to be on this panel, I'm still working at a bookshop and it came in and I saw it, was like, oh my God, I need this. So I was so excited. So in the book, you talk about this being a 5-year project. Could you speak to your process of how you found folks and communities to interview and collaborate with? And then from there, the process of interviewing and translating that into the beautiful work that we see in the book.
Yeah, sure. So I started the book, in like 2015, 2016-ish. And it was kind of inspired by, I guess, some reflections that I was doing at the time around just honestly the brilliance of some of the people that were in my close community, like friends and loves and acquaintances and people that I just learned so much from. And I was always like chit-chatting with over dinner or coffee or drinks or whatever about like queerness and love and power and activism and all these things. And so I was just like, these people are like celebrities to me. These people are like geniuses to me. It doesn't matter that they're coming from like the expertise or whatever. I just learned so much from my friends,? And so I was like, maybe I'll just like write some of these down and like illustrate them. I feel like that'd be a really fun project. So I definitely started with people that I knew and felt comfortable with. And I think that was, again, coming from a place of like genuine love, but also maybe a place of like, maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome, that like, I think working on this, it definitely got better over the 5 years, but like, I definitely was battling a lot of like, no one's going to want to work on this with me. Like, I'm going to have to beg people, or like, I'm gonna, or like, I don't want to pressure anyone into doing this. Like, I think I just had a lot of feelings of like, because the stories were very personal and a lot of themes coming up around like oppression and pain and like white supremacy, capitalism, ableism, all of these experiences that were really personal to people. I didn't want it to feel exploitative in any way, or and I was just real that intention was just so in the forefront. So I think that working with people that I already had like a new a trusting relationship with, I think that was easier for me. And then as my confidence sort of built, I was like, okay, well, I have a friend of a friend who, works at Trans Assistance Project, for example, which is, it's like great organization. And I was like, okay, I'll just send a little email and maybe they won't get back to me, blah, blah. But then of course they did. And they were really excited about it. And that just kept happening, like I would reach out to people who first it was friends of friends, then it was people who I didn't know at all, and it felt like it was just this very organic process. And I think that working on this project for 5 years actually allowed, like, I feel like I grew with the project, like my relationship to collaboration and communication and transparency and all the things that I think are really necessary to make a very sensitive book like this really developed. And I think that I developed better. I think I became a more direct communicator. I think I became a little more confident and a better facilitator over those 5 years. And I'm really grateful for that. So that's kind of, and I think your second question was about sort of translating these interviews into, this. And it was hard because I had to cut so much out. Like, obviously, like I really battled like not having too much text on each page, but like we'd have these beautiful conversations that, when you transcribe an interview, it ends up being like so long, and then you can't like load all of that into a page or else no one can read it. So yeah, it was hard. It was really hard to have to like fully strike out a whole paragraph of some brilliant thing that someone said. Like at one point there's a piece called People's Medicine, a conversation with Jelani Fontaine, who is an acupuncturist in New York. And they went on this whole gorgeous conversation about mugwort, about the herb mugwort, and like what it represents to their own healing process and their process as a healer, all this stuff. And I had to completely erase it. And it felt so sad, but I had to do that all the time. And I think doing that over and over again was just also building my trust that like people would get it, you know, that like the illustrations would also do something and communicate something. So yeah, that was hard though.
Yeah, it is hard. So you were your own editor in that process then, like you were the one determining that like this wouldn't make it into the final. I think the personal aspects really come through, and I think you can really tell that you were having good communication with the people that you were working with. I loved how personal it was. I think often we don't get enough of that. I feel like sometimes when it's types of anthologies, it's almost like we're being looked at under a lens by some like an other, like we're othered in that way. So when you get to give the own voice, and something that I think Sami does especially really well in The Pleasure of the Text too, like I think that's just like so important. So I really appreciate the work. The last question I wanted to ask, back kind of on time, and I was thinking about this question personally as someone who is on the margins and makes queer work. There was a part where you said that an artist needs to work at a pace that's right for them. And I love that you said that. It really resonated with me. I feel like as someone who's a person of color and queer, sometimes because there's not enough representation of us, I'm like, I need to make so much work, and I need to make so much work right now because there is such a void and I have to fill it. So I was just wondering if you had felt any of that as you were working on this project at all.
Yeah, I definitely think that I had to work through my own internalized like perfectionism and like internalized capitalist voice, which I'm sure everyone kind of deals with, but especially with like social media now. And I think that I definitely follow a lot of illustrators that like post stuff every day or post stuff every week, are constantly like pooping out content. And I have no idea how they do that. And I definitely was like, oh, dang, like, do I need to be like posting like process drawings like every second and doing a gazillion hashtags and like trying to like make all this stuff? And then I honestly think I have to credit, like, I think that a lot of my thinking around deconstructing some of that internalized capitalism comes from my from learning from disability justice movement and activists and queer and trans people of color within that, particularly because I think that there is an ableism to, and a racism, like you're talking about too, to those expectations of ourselves, you know, to be producing and, you know, producing no matter what the cost on our mental health, you know, or our, like, people are working jobs, or we're living our lives, or doing our thing, you know, like it's ridiculous to have these standards. And I think, like I expressed in the introduction of this book, that I definitely got self-conscious at times that like I started this in 2015 and that by 2021, it's not going to be relevant anymore. Like, because we consume media so quickly now that it's like, you see something and then like it's gone in 5 seconds, or like the next day the trend is over, you know? And so reminding myself that that working at your own pace and trusting yourself is like, it's central to actually like making the thing. So I'm glad that resonated with you, Cleo. That's really nice to hear.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think I don't want to slaughter her name, but in the foreword by Leah Pipineza, I can't say it. I won't. If you can, that would be amazing.
Yeah, Leah Lakshmi Pyachna Samar Singha.
Yes, I love her work. And the foreword was such a beautiful encapsulation of what you were going to get in that book, because she took all these like parts from everything that was already in it and made such a beautiful poem, and also with the message of like having rest. And because she is such an amazing like transformative justice and disability activist worker, it really came through. So I love that, and I love the book. So thank you so much for creating it and sharing it with us. So I'm going to go on to Sami to talk about The Pleasure of the Text. And thank you so much, Syan. Hello, Sami. Hey. First question. So there's such a beautiful variety to the style of work that you've included in this book. I wanted to know how you approach the style you're going to use for which story. And in addition to this, how did you decide on the designs of the character of Sami? Am I saying that correct?
So it's like same, but the H
Yeah.
is aspirated at the end.
Same. Because those characters, like, when I'm reading it, I'm like, is this Sami or is this like a facade of Sami? Like, I found it so interesting that I'm like, this character is you, but it's also not you. And then the use of using characters that aren't yourself to kind of tell stories that may or may not be personal stories, and breaking that, which might have to do with a Roland Barthes concept. I don't know. Since The Pleasure of the Text shares the same title as Roland Barthes, if no one knows that. I learned that looking that up and being like, wrong book. That wasn't what I was looking for. Yeah, sorry. I feel like I got away from the question. If you need me to repeat it, please let me know.
No, I think I can handle that. So for this style thing, I mean, I work in a lot of different mediums. I don't know. I remember in art school, I had a teacher who said like, "Oh my God, do you have multiple personality disorder or something?" I kind of just get bored with working in one way. I find like for me also, there's definitely a sense of like wanting to grow with each story. So I feel like every time I figure out how to do something, I'm kind of like, all right, I know how to do that. Let's try doing an entire comic in oil painting, or let's try improvising an entire comic or whatever like that. So I definitely try to match the tone and the content and the subject matter to what the story is actually about. Like one of the stories, American Psycho, in there was all collaged, and it almost gave me like the feeling of like a ransom note, because it had that kind of creepy vibe to it, and it kind of captured the feeling of, because it was about like marginalization and white supremacy and all those things. So that kind of I tried to kind of weave that into it. I'm trying to think of the other stories. I definitely will even actually say that I've consciously tried to pare down what I'm doing. I think that, I mean, when we're talking about internalized capitalism and like the push to post things on Instagram, I think a lot of that is also like the branding thing is really pushed on people. You have to be doing like one consistent thing all the time. And that's just like a sort of a marketing thing. I don't really feel like that's how my brain works. I don't feel like that's how I take in information. And it also feels very much like a straitjacket. It's like I can only communicate in this one way. So that's I guess a bit about the style choices, because there's a lot of variety in here. I don't really do much oil painting anymore because it takes up a lot of space and it's extremely expensive and it makes me feel sick physically. To talk about the character, I guess pretty early on, like the earliest story in this collection is The Dead Father. And both of the characters, there's like one character's name is Sami Alwani, and then the other character's name is Baby Alwani, but they're both kind of me. So I kind of like started to get interested by like separating the identity into like two different personas. But then on top of that, I wanted to like, you know, if this is Baby and this is Sami, I wanted to take something that Baby would say and have it come through Sami's mouth and vice versa. I don't really know like exactly, it's more of an intuitive decision for me. But I do kind of feel like I question individual identity like a lot. Like it's sort of a dissociative thing, like, you know, like questioning whether you're alive or not, or whether reality is real. So like it kind of ties into that. It's like these characters kind of all flow into each other. Saeme, the dog, he was like, he's one of the main characters in the book. And I think he kind of encapsulated a lot of things for me. Like the idea to make his name like my own name, but just like a little bit weirder and like harder to pronounce, was partially because like I'm Arab. My parents are from Syria. I was born here. But obviously I'm light skinned and I'm white passing, which is something that I think about a lot. So I kind of wanted to think about, you know, I face discrimination in some fields and not others. And if I'm making this character he's kind of about the feeling of otherness. So I wanted to exoticize his name. You know, it's like if I project in like a super Arab way and you interpret me in that way, then you're going to treat me differently than if I have a name that sounds like an anglicized version. You know, like Sami is like an Arabic name. It's an Arabic word, but it sounds like Sami from Samuel in English, for example. So that's, I feel like he kind of touches on a few different things, but that was a big inspiration for the construction of his character. But a lot of the time it's also just funny. Like there's a character named Simi Antflick. Like I used to have a day job working at the Toronto International Film Festival, and there was just a list of names in the back room of people who signed up for something. And I saw Simi Antflick and I thought, oh my God, like that's almost like a bizarro world version of my name. And then my other friend saw a news report about a person in, I think, Abu Dhabi or something, whose name was Sami Alwani. And I was like, okay, well, that's my new character too. Yeah, so that's, sorry, I'm a little long-winded, but yeah, that would be my answer.
No, it's perfect. And I think in a lot of the short stories in The Pleasure of the Text, there is kind of the talk of the dissociative identity, which I really related to. I found myself relating to like a lot of the stuff that was like being talked about and laughing, and then also being like, oh, and then also like feeling like, oh, like I felt like it was like an emotional roller coaster the whole time, but I loved it. So thank you so much. I wanted to also ask, because I know The Idiot was a zine because I worked at Page and Panel, and I remember there was a copy of it there. So I wanted to know, like, where does this collection start? Because it seems like it covers like a really large portion of like so much of like your work, and it's amazing to see, like we talked about, the different changes in style and everything. But yeah, could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of hard to explain because so like the earliest story was The Dead Father. I did that. I started drawing that in junior year of art school, and that took like 2 years because I was I'm a really slow working artist in the first place, but back then it was like glacial pace. So, and I was such a perfectionist. So by the time that finished, my process kind of sped up. So it was like 2 years of The Dead Father. And then after art school, everything else is about 5 years. So I would say I was releasing everything as floppies, as zines, up until like a year and a half ago. And then I made about 40, 50 pages of new work for the collection. So it is definitely, you can see the style change, and my drawing get better, I feel like, too. Like even halfway through, because The Dead Father took such a long time and I was not smart enough to think about penciling everything first and then rendering it. I just rendered each page at a time. And I was just rereading it recently, and I was like, on page 7, you can see like, oh, this is actually a lot better than at the start. So yeah, it's collecting everything that I've done for the past long while. So it's a smorgasbord, I guess. Yeah,
It is. And thank you so much for like having it. Like, I'm excited for everybody to be able to get to experience your work all in one place. So I guess I'm like really curious about the naming it Pleasure of the Text and the Roland Barthes thing, because I feel like I learned about Roland Barthes when I was in like 2010 university, so it's out of my brain. I don't remember it. It's like I went to art school. I don't know anything anymore about smart things. So yeah, if you could speak to referencing the Pleasure of the Text, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna sound really annoying because I kind of all of the titles in the book are from works that already exist. So the Misfortunes of Virtue story, and that's named after the novel Justine, The Misfortunes of Virtue by de Sade, for example. But I actually like some of these works I actually did read, and some of them I like, a small percentage I haven't. But to be completely honest, like the main thing is that I just thought the title applied perfectly to what I wanted to say. Like American Psycho is the book by Bret Easton Ellis that got turned into a movie, for example. Most of the time it weaves back into the content of what I'm working on. The Pleasure of the Text is a book that he wrote, and it's kind of about Roland Barthes, who's I would say a huge influence. Like he's one of my favorite writers for sure. It's about like this feeling of almost erotic pleasure that you get from the act of reading. And it can be, it's reading a book or any piece of media that you're experiencing. Like, I don't know if you know, like the word frisson, like when you get that goosebump feeling when you're reading. Yeah. So it's like this kind of energy, and he likens it to an orgasm. And I think it's really cool because it's like kind of queering text too. He talks about like cruising. The author's job is to cruise the reader without being able to see him, which I thought was really funny and interesting. So yeah, that like it like all the titles, they sort of apply, and they sort of, I'm just like making it. There's one called The History of Sexuality. I did try to read, I got about halfway through the first volume of Foucault's book, but I think I didn't get all of it, I won't lie, but it sort of just situates it too. I like to wear my heart on my sleeve and like show people the things that I'm thinking about, and like the lineage or the ancestry kind of like it kind of weaves it back into history and like the discourse of, you know, thinkers throughout, you know, the centuries, I guess. Yeah.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Bars is a queer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he's actually pretty cute. He was,
I'll have to Google.
yeah, he's a French thinker. He invented basically the study of semiotics, or no, well, he didn't invent it. That was de Saussure, I think, or I can't remember his name exactly. But he was one of the main thinkers associated with semiotics, which kind of went into structuralism theory and stuff like that. So he worked a lot with symbols, like basically how we interpret symbols and use like mythologies around different acts and things like that. Yeah,
that's so cool. I like love that, and it kind of like it suits like your book perfectly, the panel perfectly, because building blocks, queer history,
exactly.
always been here. Looking at a picture,
yeah, totally.
Not for me, but I support you.
Thank you. Oh, you found him.
Yeah, I took
a look. I respect that. I have very particular taste, I won't lie.
So do I. So don't you worry about it. Thank you so much. We will chat again when I have the questions for everybody. So now, thank you for waiting patiently, Lee. I'd love to talk about Stone Fruit. I'm so lucky to have been able to read all of these books and be on this panel, because like, the quality of work was so good. I finished Stone Fruit and I just had to I was like, woof. And then I did this, and then I shed a couple of tears. And it was like, it was a lot. It was so good. So thank you for making this work. In Stone Fruit, there are so many subtle nuances, and I just wanted to know what it was like for you to create this story, and where you first got the idea. And I wanted to mention that it kind of reminded me a lot of First Year in how it was stylistic, and also in your portrayals of relationships, and that were not only queer but romantic and familial. Because I love First Year. That book also made me go woof. So if people watching this have not read First Year, they should. I love that book. Yes, sorry.
Well, thank you. That's so nice. I'm so glad you liked both of them. I will say that First Year doesn't exist anywhere anymore. So for people watching this, it was all on Tumblr, but because it's got like butts and nipples and a bit of groping and stuff, it's really not that explicit, but it's gay and I guess sexy enough that Tumblr censored 80% of it or something. So the last time I logged in there, most of it was taken down, and I just kind of rolled my eyes and deleted my whole Tumblr. There's too many social media problems, you know?
Yeah,
But
valid.
if you are listening to this and you want to read it, I have it as a PDF, and you should just email me and I can send it to you. That's probably
Beguiling might still have copies.
it might,
I don't
yeah.
know, but they might.
There's like it's a tiny little book, like this big, and it's circulating around at some point.
I can
from,
show
like,
it 1 second. Just 1
2017.
second.
Okay.
This is first
Little
year.
chunky guy.
Yeah.
A couple of boys with a lot of feeling. Anyway, so Stonefruit was the project that came after that. It's like, I don't really know whether first year counts as a book. It feels like it's just kind of a long, short comic. But it was long enough that I kind of felt by the end of it that I was able to make something longer, or I wanted to give it a go. And so I started making Stonefruit maybe 6 months after that. And there was a lot happening in my personal life at the time. There was just a lot of big emotional shifts going on in my life. And so the Stonefruit, I mean, it's kind of just about a cluster of relationships breaking apart and growing anew, and, you know, estrangements coming closer together, and, you know, a romantic relationship that's falling apart despite both parties' best efforts. And it became much more about the relationships as a story that I was working on just in script form for the first year, as I got to know the characters better. But before that point, I started writing about Auntie Ray and Nessie, who's a 6-year-old who's very screamy and sweet. And I was just going through a lot of parenting feeling at the time. I think I was 23 and really kind of just grappling with whether I wanted to have kids or not, and whether that was something I needed to be thinking about in the next 10 years, or whether I just wanted to be completely childless for the rest of my life. And I think at this point, I'm 28 now, and I think I've kind of settled into like, yes, children, not for me. But I really do love kids and love having them around me. And so I wanted to show what it was like for restless, depressed, super creative millennial queers to be in positions of responsibility and intimacy with children. And like, so I started just writing these vignettes about Auntie Ray and her partner, who came in later, who's Bron, interacting with this kid, and the kind of mutual magic that they get out of that. Like, Nessie really loves them and gets a lot out of that, but she's also leading them in like kind of just a different kind of embodiment, in different kind of release and ease and joy that they don't normally get in their lives, because they're just being kind of ground down by everything that's going on for them. And so these like 2 or 3 page vignettes expanded out to be the story, the longer story that it is now, that kept tripping me up, because like this is a cliche, and a lot of people who write long stories talk about this, but it really gets away from you. Like, I think, Syan, you were talking about that too in a very different context, but you start a project and you think you know what it's going to look like, and you have this idea of it, and then you get to know the parties better, whether they're real people that you're collaborating with or fictional characters in my case, and it took a whole new direction. So the book started off being about a breakup and ended up being much more about sibling relationships and siblinghood.
Yeah, I definitely like feel that in working on long projects and then it becoming something completely different. You mentioned Nessie, which is great, because my next question is about Nessie, who I loved. I loved all the interactions with Nessie, and I also made me think about, like having children while being queer, and also kind of like, I feel like we all maybe, I know it's different for everyone, but like queer childhood is like weird, because like, have you been your true self the whole time, or have you not? Like, so all of these things. So I thought being able to go, because I love when they're playing at play with Nessie, how they turn into like these feral creatures. I love the illustrative style of that, and also being in nature. I feel like when you get to be in natural spaces, such as like the woods or a park or whatever, it is something like lifts as a weight, at least speaking for me personally. And I think having that depicted in Stone Fruit just made me think about like being in nature and reverting back to like childish tendencies, how healing and freeing that can be, but also when you do have to go back to the things that are a bit harder, what that like, I don't know, like how that, like the switch from that and kind of like the struggle of that, and like how when you're queer, you're like always like, you're always 10 years younger or whatever, because you didn't have that. That wasn't really a question, but if you could speak to anything that I've just said, that would be great.
Oh, I can do that. It's been something that has been coming up a lot, and it's interesting hearing everyone's different reactions on it. It's like feels very abundant for me. But yeah, I wanted to draw monsters just because I wanted to draw monsters, you know? Like I think the meaning kind of came afterwards, but those play times between the three of them, like, I mean, the story is pretty heavy. Like it's about a breakup, it's about tough family relationships, it's about like queers trying their best when they're dealing with a lot of mental illness shit. And I wanted some levity, you know? Like I think it was important to have something that was a little bit lighter and a bit more joyful. But I think one thing that came up way later, which isn't entirely like related to just this idea of levity, but like, I think it was normal to me to be thinking about queers and child rearing because, you know, I'm surrounded by homos. Like we talk about childcare in similar ways with similar complications, but it's interesting putting this story out into the public and realizing that it's not necessarily a common experience to be having these conversations around like, I don't know, power imbalances and power dynamics in relation to like bio connections, you know? And so I think like the combination of the fact that Bron and Ray both get like a lot of joy and a lot of energy out of these times of Nessie, and also that there's all this kind of like fragile, volatile imbalances going on with like the fact that Ray is biologically related to Nessie and Bron is not, but then also that Ray is only the auntie compared to like Amanda, who's the mother, who's straight and like super controlling and also incredibly jealous of them because they're fun and queer and don't have the same kind of responsibilities. Like, but everybody has a place to feel vulnerable in a situation where they're all really, really kind of needing and wanting intimacy with this kid who's kind of oblivious to all of it and it's just like, I'm having a great time. I love everyone in this. I have no problems with anybody. Like, I guess it was just fun to throw that into the pot and start mixing it and see what happened, you know?
Yeah, thank you. I love that. And I think you're very talented at writing nuanced relationships. Like it isn't just a black and white scenario where like that person's wrong, because you'll show Ray's sister be like saying something that's like not okay, but like then later on in the chapters, like there's an apology and like there's like kind of growth from it. And I don't know, I want to eat the book. I want to eat all your guys' books and just like have them live inside me, which is the biggest compliment, even though it's like weird for me. I just like want to eat good books. So I like, yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you. I don't know what time we're at, but I do have questions for everyone. And since I haven't gotten anything to tell me that we're going over yet, this is great. So using Syan's book as a jumping off point, our work is everywhere. So I wanted to ask everyone to speak to the queer work that inspires you and how you create your work. And that can be like anything, anything you want. It doesn't have to be a comic, I mean.
I can jump in pretty quickly with one. You guys seen Desiree Akvan's films? She did a series called The Bisexual. She also did a film called Appropriate Behavior. And her films are really good. They're just like, everyone's excruciatingly uncomfortable, but they're also really, it's very like sucker punch, emotional, intense drama, but also really good comedy. But she also, like, Syan and Sami, you were both talking about kind of like pushing against perfectionism and, you know, like the capitalist grind of needing to provide all this content all the time. And she talks about her films in ways that feel very like anti-Hollywood and anti like producing things at a really high rate. And one of the things that she said in one of her author talks, or I guess filmmaker talks, that was very cool and I think about all the time, was that she suggests for emerging artists that one of the best skills they can cultivate for themselves is learning to tolerate your own mediocrity and just like, you know, work at your pace, like develop your skills as you need to, but also just like give projects the time that they need and accept that they're not going to be perfectly within your control. And I think specifically, you know, as a woman, as people of color, as queers, like there is a lot of pressure to be putting out perfect things because you are speaking to some kind of experience that whether you want to adopt that for yourself as an identity or whether people are just going to place that onto you and your work, it creates a lot of pressure. But all to say, her work is excellent and has been a source of a lot of inspiration for how I write and how I think of my work as well.
I'm gonna check that out. I wrote it down. I'm excited. I'm always looking for new things to watch and also so surprised that these things have always existed. I mean, of course they've always existed going back to Science title, but like, I don't know, like sometimes they're just like buried in a way that you're like, wow, this has been out there the whole time. Like for me, I'll give the example of The Watermelon Woman by Cheryl Denny, I believe. And like, I just watched that last year. I'm like, holy shit, this movie's been out for like 10 years. And like, I hadn't really heard or seen anything about it at the time. So yeah, love new discoveries.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to pinpoint. When I'm on the spot, it's so hard to name drop. Like, I feel like I'm just like so into so many different things. Like especially with influencing my work, like I watch a lot of film, I read a lot of fiction, and like recently, like a few years ago, my friend and I did a queer film series and we were showcasing a lot of like niche works by like Almodovar and Gregor Araki and people like that. So I don't know if I could pick like just a couple of people exactly. But yeah, it's definitely like queer work. I don't know. I seek out queer film a lot. Oh, you know what? You know who's really a big influence on me is James Baldwin. Actually, I would say is a huge. I even just on the level of language that he uses, going into the writing aspect. But yeah, I'm always inspired by queer voices and like the fire in them, and kind of like it kind of like pushes you a little bit, you know, you feel like almost like a responsibility to like carry that torch, I guess. Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite, like I would say my favorite cartoonist right now is Simon Hanselman, and his work is like super duper gay. So yeah, so I would say like it definitely feels nice to be inside of a collection of people, like we're all working together kind of. Yeah.
Syan?
Oh my God, I know, I'm having so many people are coming to mind. I'm thinking about, I feel like this is cliche almost, but I'm thinking about Alison Bechdel. I'm just like, I remember reading Dykes to Watch Out For, and just like falling so in love with like comics and like being queer and like, and then when I read Fun Home, I think that was when I really was like, oh, maybe I could do this type of art. And I also found out that she's a Virgo and I'm a Virgo, and I've like read some things about her process that are very anal and cuckoo, that like I'm like, I do that too. And I just feel like when I read, the thing that inspired me the most about Fun Home was, which is for people who haven't read it, it's like this sort of, it's about Alison writing a narrative about her going into her family archives and like and memorabilia, and basically finding out that her father, who has passed, maybe was queer and was closeted. But she has like 3 different versions of herself. She has her writing the book, her living her adult life, and then her as a child, and they all kind of like overlap with each other. And my work is nothing like, I don't ever write fiction or do character design, or my work is mostly like symbolic and kind of surrealist or whatever. And I don't really know how to do character design, I don't think. But the thing that I loved about that, as I was like, oh, she's telling like 5 different stories at once in one panel, you know, or like on one page. Like the way that she does layouts, like she'll have like a rendering of a photograph paired with like a photograph of her dad with like a ghost image of her as a child here, and then like her having queer sex over here, and it's just like all happening at once. And I think that I really like got a lot of inspiration from her work, both very literally, like with the way that you could play with layout, and like comics don't have to just be like box, 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 box. And I don't use frames in any way. Like a lot of my work is kind of more designy in that it's all overlapping all this stuff. But also just with this idea that like you can express things through so many different ways, you know, like with comics, you can, I mean, I'm really excited to read Stone Fruit. I'm such a fan of your work, Lee. I'm really excited to see it. And this idea of like having people transforming into like these monster freaks while they're in nature, I'm like, yeah, you can just do that when you're making comics. You can just, or like Sami with your, you know, changing styles, like you can have someone all of a sudden be a different color or like in a different line weight, and then it's like a different things happening. And Alison Bechdel really plays with that a lot. And even though her drawings are pretty representational, she has like all these things going on at once. And I think that I just love that, you know. And you can like, I found with making my book, I really tried to play with on like having certain pages that were just like mostly image. There's like a few times in the book, I mean, it's a lot of text, but there are some moments of like quiet with like image and like a line. And I almost wish I did that a little bit more and took a little more time, but like, I love the way that you can play with pacing too, with, now this is just going into me gushing about comics, but like, you know, that you can play with like, with the pacing or the story, and it's like dreamlike, you know, you can like cut to this reality. And then now this reality is also on top, because you can just layer these things. And yeah, that's kind of what this is all bringing up for me right now, I guess.
I love that you can do that with comics. And I think it's one of the reasons that queer makers can do such cool things with comics as a medium, because you don't need a larger budget to like transform someone into a different body, for example, or like just change setting. Like you can do whatever you want, and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I wanted to say like, so like in thinking about all these different excellent queer makers, whether they're like, you know, artists or filmmakers or writers or whatever, like, I don't know if you ever have the experience of being in a classroom or a convention space or a party or something, and all the queers just like gravitate towards each other, and it's like this inexplicable magnetism that just happens, where it's just like, oh, I just feel the urge to hang out with you. Like, I find you significantly more interesting than anybody else in this room, inexplicably. And I think sometimes it's the same with like content, like in terms of the art that is coming out and the stories that are coming out. I'm just like, oh, am I obsessed with this? Like, why am I obsessed with this? And being like, oh, it's queer. And like, whether that's a coincidence or whether it's that like magical magnetic extra something, I have no idea. But I'm glad that there's just more queer stories coming out all the time, because it's just often the most.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I mean, I don't really interact with that many like straight people anymore in life in general. Not that I'm like against people being straight, but it's just like, I don't know, when you're a queer person, you just kind of like, it's like, it's hard, you know. A lot of people talk about representation. I don't know, there was an amazing movie I saw like 3 years ago called Beach Rats, and it was like, it's this guy going on these hookup apps and cruising for older men in the woods, and you would see these scenes on film and you would be like, I have never seen this, my experience, like on a screen anywhere before. And now I'm sitting in a theater and watching it. I mean, maybe there's only 5 people. There were only 5 people in the theater at the time. But but it's like, you know, it actually is really, validate. It seems cliche to say validating, but it's like it just, then you can actually start to have a conversation about those experiences. Whereas before, it's like that door is not even open before. You know what I mean? So.
I wanted to comment on that, the thing that you said, Lee, about queers just like doing that in spaces. And it's so funny because like you're describing my experience so perfectly. When I used to live in Seattle, and there was some comics fest that there's Short Run, which happens there, which is an amazing comics festival that I've tabled at a few times. And it was funny because I think it was the first or second time I tabled there, and there was like a group of maybe like 6 of us queers who just started to kind of do that mergy thing. We're like, hey, what are you making? Hi, what are you doing? And like, you know, like art flirting with each other. And we ended up making like a comics collective. It was called The Hand. And it was me, Rachel Duazo, E.T. Russian, Robin Jordan, and Andy Panda. And all of their work is gorgeous. And it was so funny because we just, even having that community of people who like weren't just straight white men making misogynist comics, no offense, no offense to like, I feel like there was some bullshit like work that I was seeing that really either bored me or annoyed me in the like alternative art scene, whatever. And it felt so fucking refreshing and cool to just come together with people that wanted to create art, to like work through shit. I mean, not saying that like, you know, we're all doing our thing, no, whatever, but but like it felt so special to have that space. And not everyone was making work about queerness. People were just making their work, whatever, but it just felt so cool to like have that level of like, regardless of whatever our work is about, we all know that we're, even though we're all going to make mistakes, we're all at least trying to like envision a better world that is like, you know, we're going to try to do that to, you know, anyway. So I just feel really like I have so many fond memories thinking about that time and thinking about that collective, and how just the fact that we were all queer together really, I don't know, it was so supportive and really like helpful to my development and confidence too.
Can I also say, like, when you are taught, when there was that note about full offense about, I think a lot about this because it's like the comics industry is great. I love it. But it has this reputation for being like super progressive, super far left, super liberal. But the industry is still really dominated by straight white cisgendered people 90% of the time. And I'm really excited seeing a lot of queer voices come to the forefront. But again, even when we do get these opportunities, even when we do get the spotlight, the people in administrative positions, the people running, you know, who are editors, who are publishers, those positions haven't really mixed up as much, I will say. Maybe I'm getting a bit controversial here, so I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody. But yeah, it is like, I think it's nice that we can actually get these voices in and actually start to shake things up a little bit, because it is, you know, I have a big problem with the world of fine art. I find that it's even more so like saying one thing, and then on the other hand, you are funded by, you know, Israeli apartheid, Warren Kanders, like all this stuff. And it's like, on a micro level, like comics is a lot more democratic because you don't need to have a master's in fine art to get into the scene. But there's still boundaries to be broken down. And I think it's good to acknowledge that and to keep pushing through them. Yeah.
Yeah, I like, thank you so much for saying that. I think it is really publishing books. Or when we do, they don't, and it's because they're leaving, because they've had to be like, I couldn't work in this toxic environment because it was abusive. And it's like, so you're saying all these diverse things and then you're doing all of these things, like,
yeah,
it's like, I see you.
It's like if you are a person who's not marginalized and you're showcasing marginalized voices, that's great. I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, you still have the power to decide which marginalized voice gets to be spotlighted, and you know, which messages you might deem, even unconsciously, are not represented. You know what I mean?
We have 5 minutes left. I did have one more question, which we were kind of already touching on. Everyone here has worked with zines, and I love zines. They're how I got started in comics. I feel like that's how we all maybe got started in comics. So I wanted to ask how working with zines helped you start publishing your work, and your experiences of being part of zine communities. Syan, you already spoke to this, which was like amazing. And comparing or talking about the similarity of zine communities to like the queer communities that you belong to, because I found personally for me that like becoming more part of the zine scene is how I found more people who are like my found family now. And I feel like, yeah, that's helped me grow as a person so much and an artist.
I can say a quick thing about it. Like I think there's a lot of similarities between those two, partly because at least in Montreal and certainly in Melbourne, like the zine scene is just full of queers. Like there's no difference really between the two things. And I think particularly in Montreal, my experience of the queer community here has been that like people are really into skill sharing and resource sharing, helping each other out. Maybe it's also a symptom of lower rent that people have time to give as well as like skills and resources. And so I think there's just been a lot of cool things around people like running risograph presses and screen printing presses and like being excited to help people bind their things together and like distribute them and encouraging them. I think like the mutual encouragement piece has been huge, because kind of like what we were talking about before, everyone's struggling with these ideas of the imposter syndrome, the perfectionism, and zines are kind of irreverent to that. Like I think they just encourage you to finish a fucking thing and put it in a pile and shove a staple through it, you know, and then like put it out into the world and let people pay their $5 for it, you know. It's just like a really nice way of making something feel a little bit official while also giving you enough room to be like, this will be like, I'm never going to think about this again after the 25 copies that I make of it. And maybe it'll sit on someone's like, you know, zine string in their living room forevermore. But like, I think mostly it's like the most I've seen of a still somewhat commercial system that's like very based on trade and bartering and like exchange, like skill exchange and collaboration as well. And it just, because it's so hard to define, I think it's been so wonderful for allowing the content and the form to be whatever it needs to be and allow for like so much room and so much experimentation.
Yeah, and I also, speaking to that, I think like one thing that's really inspiring about the comics world is that it's like there isn't much infrastructure to, I mean, obviously I love TCAF and all the festivals that and the publishers that prop us up, but in the localized zine culture of like people self-publishing in their own community, it's really cool because it's entirely self-constructed. So like it's our own passion and it's our own energy that's creating an entire reading culture, and we have our own kind of language that we're teaching each other and constructing as we go. And so, which I think it really mirrors like queer communities and the code switching involved and the culture creation involved. It's kind of like an interesting parallel. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one more thing I wanted to add is I love like everything that you all are saying about, like, this is just really resonating with me, because I feel like the confidence piece is everything, and like the to publish and get your work out there, and the barriers that people face around that, like systemically internalized stuff, is just like so real. And I think that talking and thinking about zine culture also really just demystifies so much around publishing, because like, you know, for me, and I'm sure a lot of people who make comics have a similar experience of like, you know, I didn't just get to this, like with an ISBN number, like all of a sudden, like it was years and years and years of like going to little zine fest and trading things or selling things for $5 or like, you know, showing or distributing work at like of random events that had nothing to do with zines or anything. I don't even know, you know? And so I think it's cool how like, it's like it's a step in, and then you start to build a body of work. And then, you know, I was able to, you know, I had a portfolio, so then I could like submit my portfolio to table at other zine fests or to do editorial work or to, you know, start to get art gigs and illustration gigs. And I just feel like that is a path that is actually really accessible for people, and like young people too. Like I taught a class for teens in Seattle, like an art class, and we did some stuff with self-publishing and like bookmaking, and they were just so into it and so excited. And I think felt really, I mean, I can't speak for them, but it seemed like a lot of the youth, you know, just felt like they were being taken seriously, you know, like they're publishing a thing. And I find that really inspiring. And you know, I'm actually moving in a different kind of direction. My art career is kind of on a little bit of a pause after the book. And I'm in acupuncture school now. So I'm like going in a very different direction. I don't know what that's going to be like at all. What kind of scene, I don't know, whatever. But I just think of that, all of these things that you're saying so fondly, you know, like festivals like TCAF, even though I've never been, like I can imagine that's just like a warm, inviting space. And yeah, of course there's a million problems and we should be talking about them and breaking them down. But the accessibility is the goal, is not even just the goal, but needs to be at the forefront, I think, of like art making. And I think zines is a great place to start for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was also just thinking of what you're saying. It's like zines were my first experience, you know, making money off of my comics. And I will say I'm like the most anti-money person. Like I hate money. I don't think it should exist, but you need it to make a living as an artist. And being able to self-publish and not having the gatekeeping of any infrastructural kind of or administrative body kind of like governing who gets in, just being able to get your work directly to people, get paid for it, and be able to make more work is like really essential. And it actually invites a much greater variety of voices, I think, to be able to like, yeah, make that type of work. So yeah, I love zines.
Yay. I think we got the 5-minute mark. I think we've gone over. I think that's it. I think that's all we have time for. It has been, it's been so good talking to all of you. I wish we could have been in person, but this is just as great. And hopefully one day, Syan, you can come to TCAF because it is a really amazing experience. Yeah, thank you all for your time so much. Everyone, buy Pleasure of the Text. Our work is everywhere, and Stone Fruit. Get them from your local bookstores, your comic book shops. Don't support Amazon. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Big love to everybody here and everybody who's watching. So goodbye.
Thanks so much, Cleo, and Sami and Lee and Syan. That was a great conversation to listen to. Yeah, I thought that was just a great conversation. So yeah, thank you all so much for your time today. And yeah, we'll have you at the next TCAF, which fingers crossed in person in 2022. Before I let everybody go today, I have to thank our presenting sponsor for all of our programming this year, which is Seneca School of Creative Arts and Animation. They were very helpful in getting the funding together this year, as well as our government support from the Toronto Council, the Toronto Art Council, the Ontario Art Council, and the Canada Council for the Arts. Special thanks, of course, to Page and Panel, where I am right now, as well as the Beguiling Books and Art. And speaking of zines, if you are interested in zines, this year's TCAF, we partnered with CanZine to make the exhibition website that is live right now at torontocomics.com. I think there are as many TCAF exhibitors as there are Canzine exhibitors this year. So hundreds, if not thousands of zines available for there, shipped to your door anywhere around the world. So please check it out. And we'll see you very soon. Thanks so much.